Chandler, Arizona family reunion 911 call cut phone lines. Aries did it. Verdict: second-degree murder. Before sunrise in Chandler, Arizona, a two-story home turned into a crime scene. Inside were three generations gathered for what should have been a peaceful family reunion. Moments later, first responders arrived to a trail of blood and silent landlines. In the chaos, a woman's final words would echo through years of investigations and court hearings. Tonight, we're walking through what happened, what was found, and how a family was split by grief, love, and a verdict. This story contains sensitive content. Viewer discretion is advised. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. We avoid graphic detail and respect victims and families. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we cover complex cases with care and verification, avoiding graphic descriptions and speculation. Everything presented is based on interviews, recordings, publicly reported court outcomes, and statements referenced in the script provided to us. We'll label opinion versus fact, and we'll focus on impact and context rather than sensational detail. If you or a loved one is struggling with mental health issues, we've linked resources in the description. Seeking help is a strength. If you appreciate careful coverage, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It helps more than you know. The week began like so many family gatherings, people arriving at different times, bags dropped in hallways, kids drifting between rooms, adults catching up after too long apart. The house at the center of this story was big, roughly 8,000 to 9,000 square feet, if you include its basement and detached guest house. There were living spaces on each level, bedrooms, seating areas, a theater room downstairs, and a guest house out back. Inside that big space were people who shared not just DNA, but a culture of closeness. They ate off the same plates, finished each other's sentences, and treated family like a promise. On this trip, two aunts were visiting from out of state. Sisters and cousins carved out corners to talk late and laugh easy. Tanya dependable, the one people texted when things got hard planned to spend the night. What no one knew before dawn: the home would become a locked scene and the family would leave it forever changed. Just after midnight, a frantic call came in. Someone in the house was bleeding badly her neck. There was confusion, fear, and a heartbreaking scramble to understand what had happened. The dispatcher kept the caller on the line, urging pressure on the wound, asking basic questions no one could answer. What caused it? Where else is she injured? Are the phones working? They weren't. Multiple interior phone lines were dead later found cleanly cut. In a house with family members spread across rooms and even across a detached guest house, silence on the lines wasn't just eerie, it was a barrier to help. By the time the first officers reached the address, paramedics had already rushed Tanya to the hospital. The front entry was secured. Body-worn cameras captured a stark scene, a visible trail on the floor near the base of the stairs, and the quick realization that light switches, doors, and footprints were now potential evidence. From roughly 3 to 4 in the morning, the response shifted. Emergency care gave way to containment and documentation. The house was big enough to require more personnel, multiple floors, multiple kitchens and living areas, rooms to clear and map. At the same time, members of the family were escorted to the hospital, where they learned Tanya had died. In the waiting area, grief poured out sudden and loud, then quiet and heavy. Some relatives collapsed. Others tried to hold each other up. Officers worried the hospital might contain the very person responsible. No one could be allowed to leave without account. Back at the house, police separated relatives for safety and scene integrity. In the garage, Andrea, Tanya's older sister, was in tears, repeating that she couldn't lose another sister. With her was a teenage boy under a blanket. Officers told them to remain while evidence teams worked. The investigation now moved on two tracks: interviews and evidence. Half the family waited for updates at a hospital. The other half waited for answers in a garage. If you ask people who knew Tanya to describe her, they start with the same words: dependable, kind, a peacemaker. She was the aunt nieces called their favorite, the sibling people went to when life knotted up, the one who brought calm when rooms overheated. She remembered birthdays, bridged disagreements, and showed up for cousins the way others wish families always did. Her older sister, Andret, widely seen as the family's organizer, often made big things happen, housing relatives, paying bills, planning trips. Some saw it as generosity. Others felt a quiet pressure or control. In families, both can be true at once. Between them was a strong line of love. Yet under the surface were tensions born from different experiences, struggle and comfort, help given and help expected. Most didn't talk about it out loud, but it colored how people remembered the lead-up to that night. Aries grew up surrounded by attention, his mother's only child, embraced by a big web of aunts and cousins. To many, he was loved, energetic, sometimes restless, often a handful. To Tanya, he was something more, a nephew she treated like a son. He had a space at her place. She made him feel safe. Over time, relatives described shifts that worried them, distractibility, interruptions that didn't fit conversations, impulsive behavior at school. He was suspended more than once. People recalled him searching inappropriate content on school devices and making jokes that weren't really jokes. Hygiene slipped. Focus fractured. The picture that emerges is of a teenager adrift, sometimes giggling, sometimes vacant, sometimes oddly calm. Some family members believed he needed sustained mental health care. Others insisted allegations were exaggerated or untrue. There were prior reports, deeply sensitive allegations involving family members that did not result in prosecution. Some relatives wanted counseling, others wanted to move on. Like many families confronting behavior they don't know how to handle, the pattern became argument, exhaustion, and then a return to routine. Through it all, Tanya didn't turn away. When others felt burned out, she tried again. The evening started casually. 2 aunts visited from out of state. Cards were on the table. Conversations scattered across rooms. Tanya said she was tired and chose the basement couch, familiar and comfortable. Aries moved through the house, guitar in hand, drifting from upstairs to downstairs and back again. By around 10:30 p.m., lights fell in stages. Doors closed. The house settled. For a few hours, the only story was sleep. Then came the small shifts, a noise, the faint click of a cord, a hallway light on, then off. A sudden silence where a dial tone should be. In the guest house, the first scream sounded like an argument. The second made people run. On the stairs, Tanya was found bleeding, with a towel pressed against her neck. At the hospital, despite rapid care, she died. As the scene was processed, several items stood out. A knife sheath lay near the basement couch. Upstairs, a matching knife was recovered on Aries's bed. A hallway phone line had been cleanly severed. Multiple relatives' cell phones were missing from where they'd last been seen, later found together under a blanket in a bedroom. A laptop sat open but inactive. Evidence techs photographed, bagged, and cataloged each item for forensic analysis. There were no usable fingerprints on the blade. No blood spatter identified on clothes. The phone cord wasn't torn, it had been cut. These are facts. Another fact. Tanya's reported final words identified Aries as the person who hurt her. In law and in storytelling, last words carry weight. But in real time, evidence has to be tested against timelines and procedures. With no confession, no DNA tying a hand to a weapon, and no eyewitness to the precise moment, detectives faced a familiar bind, a narrow picture with heavy implications. When morning came, homicide detectives woke Aries in the garage where he had been under a blanket in a vehicle. He was moved into custody but not booked for homicide that day. Officials logged it as a medical transfer. The calculus was time and evidence. A juvenile suspect, no fingerprints on the weapon, no direct eyewitness to the act, and a case that would need more. It would take years, competency evaluations, motions, and delays before the inside of a courtroom would hear the story in full. When the case finally reached trial, the prosecution argued planning, cut phone lines, hidden cell phones, a knife upstairs that matched a sheath downstairs. They said the sequence showed intent actions taken before, during, and after. The defense countered with mental illness, describing a young man whose mind was not well, who perceived threats where there were none, who acted in fear and confusion. In a rare move, Aries testified in his own defense. He described a comment he attributed to Tanya, words that frightened him, then said he panicked, cutting phone lines and going downstairs with a knife. He claimed he closed his eyes and pushed forward when she moved, saying he had not meant to hurt her. The state maintained Tanya was sleeping and defenseless. The defense argued delusion and fear. The jury had 3 options: first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or manslaughter. They chose the middle, second-degree murder. For Tanya's sons and siblings, it wasn't the maximum outcome they had hoped for. For Aries' mother and stepfather, it was a painful relief, far from an acquittal, but also not a life sentence, and, in their view, a recognition that his mental health shaped the tragedy. At sentencing, the judge imposed a 13-year term. Psychiatric evaluations pointed to conditions requiring lifelong treatment. In court, a victim impact statement from Tanya's youngest son held the room in silence, loss of a mother who showed up every time for everyone. Aries spoke briefly, a hope for forgiveness. Afterward, the family split hardened. On one side, grief and a belief that the punishment could never balance the loss. On the other, a belief that mental illness had swallowed a son the family once knew. In the months that followed, there were signs of coping in different ways. Tanya's sons focused on honoring her name, talk of a scholarship fund, a commitment to remember who she was beyond the headlines. Andrit poured energy into charity and church events, organizing food drives, posting small reminders of faith and forward motion. They no longer spoke, but both sides carried a version of the same weight, the night everything broke. Cases like this leave a residue of questions. Why were the phone lines cut? Why were multiple cell phones gathered and hidden? What exactly happened minute by minute between a basement couch and a staircase landing? The trial answered some questions: responsibility, degree of guilt, sentence. But the human questions remain, stubborn and unsatisfying. Families carry both stories, the facts they can't escape and the memories they refuse to surrender. In the Harper family, Tanya's kindness is the dominant memory, a woman who cooked for everyone, who took calls late, who kept the peace. In the Churchillo family, there's a mother who loved her son through years of trouble and begged the world to see the illness that took him away from himself. These truths can coexist, even if they never reconcile. There's no neat moral to a story like this, but there are threads worth holding. First, mental health care is not a one-time appointment. It's a journey that requires access, patience, and professional guidance. Second, families need tools, trained counselors, community support, and practical safety planning to navigate concerning behavior. Third, accountability and compassion are not mutually exclusive. We can honor victims, insist on responsibility, and also advocate for better systems that might prevent another tragedy. We avoid graphic detail not to minimize what happened, but to keep focus on the people, especially the person lost, and on the real-world changes that help. Tanya Harper's name is etched into stone, but for those who loved her, it lives in living rooms and recipes and the instinct to show up when it's hard. The trial ended. The sentence was read. Yet the story continues in how a family cares for each other, in scholarships, in service, and the choice to honor someone by doing what they did best, making things a little easier for other people. Thank you for watching with empathy. If this video was meaningful to you, consider sharing it, and if you need support, the description